Good morning. My name is Janie Montblanc, and on behalf of the Great Basin Fire Science Exchange team and our partners, I would like to welcome you to this webinar titled The Natural Resource Conservation Service's Role in Developing Native Plant Material for Federal Land, presented by Derek Tilley, Manager of the USDA NRCS Aberdeen Plant Materials Center. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to let you know that you may ask questions of the speaker or me at any time during the webinar by typing your questions into the questions pane of your control panel at the top right of your screen. I will keep questions for the presenter in the queue and field them after the presentation. I also want to let you know that whatever you do in your control panel does not affect the webinar presentation, so you're welcome to type a test message or test your audio at any time during the webinar. If you're having problems with your audio, please open your audio pane and check your audio selections. Now I would like to introduce our presenter. Derek Tilley is an agronomist and the manager of the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service Aberdeen Plant Materials Center in Idaho. He worked as a fire effects monitor for Dinosaur National Monument and as a science aide for the University of Idaho Research and Extension Center's Weed Science program, before coming to the Aberdeen Plant Materials Center. His current research includes plant materials development for intermountain western rangeland plant communities, sagegrass habitat restoration, and the enhancement of agricultural soil health through cover cropping. Welcome, Derek, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. All right, I am making you the presenter now.
All right, is my show up?
Yes, it is.
Okay, here we go then.
Great.
All right, I'd like to first off thank Ginny and Anna and Nancy for putting this on and inviting me to speak, and welcome everyone that's listening in. So I've been asked to speak on the NRCS Plant Materials Program and its role in developing native plant releases for federal lands. So what I thought I'd do is first provide a little bit of background on the NRCS Plant Materials Program in general, and then the Aberdeen PMC in particular, then discuss our process in developing plant materials releases, and highlight maybe a few of the broadly used releases from the Plant Materials Program that you may or may not be familiar with. Okay, so I think it's important to understand the background of the NRCS Plant Materials Program so that we can have a context for what we're doing today. The Soil Conservation Service was created in 1935 in response to the Dust Bowl that hit the southern Great Plains. And we got our start as an agency to assist land managers and farmers who were dealing with the severe erosion that was happening, primarily due to unsustainable farming practices. So in April 1935, Congress recognized that, I'm quoting here, the wastage of soil and moisture resources on farm, grazing, and forest lands is a menace to the national welfare. And so that was our role in the early beginnings. And then in 1994, the SCS had a name change to the Natural Resources Conservation Service to better reflect the broadened scope of the agency's concern. At the time of the formation of the SCS, the USDA created a number of what was called soil conservation nurseries throughout the country, and their job was to grow and distribute plants for the stabilization of severely eroding lands. And these nurseries evolved into the plant materials program we have today. So currently, can you still hear me? I had a little glitch there.
Yes, I can still hear you.
Okay, good. I'll ignore that then. So today there's 27 PMCs representing various ecological regions across the U.S. The boundaries, in reality, are quite porous, so it's not as hard to find as you see on the map. There's a lot of cooperation and coordination between centers. And each center focuses on the resource concerns that most affect their area. Now, the goal of the Plant Materials Program is to use plants to solve specific resource concerns. And I think this is an important distinction from the other land management agencies whose goal is to restore native habitat. And that difference is reflected in the way we approach developing plant releases, which I'll cover in a bit. To date, the program has released over 700 conservation plants. Most are being grown by commercial growers for use today. Many of the plants released by the program are suitable for use on federal lands. And we're currently evaluating releases and releasing native grasses and forbs for ecosystem enhancement for a variety of habitats nationwide. So the Aberdeen Plant Materials Center was established in 1939. It was the fourth PMC to go online, and its job was to develop plant materials and techniques for establishment and management of plants for use in resource conservation activities in the western states. And while the technology has changed a little from the pictures you see, the goals are pretty similar. The PMC seeks out and tests plants and technologies that conserve and protect farmland, conserve forest land and grazing land resources, restore and sustain healthy natural ecosystems, and conserve and enhance critical wildlife habitat. Our service area covers most of southern Idaho and western Utah, but our products are generally applicable throughout the Intermountain West. Our current program emphases primarily involve wildlife habitat, specifically habitat for sage-grouse and pollinators. And as such, we do a lot of work in developing plants and technologies for arid and semi-arid plant communities. We also do work on improving production on grazing lands and investigating cover crops for improving soil health and reducing erosion in agricultural systems. And although our primary customer is the NRCS field office and the public landowner, our program goals and areas of research overlap with those of the BLM and Forest Service and other land management agencies. We operate on 3 farms here in Aberdeen with a total of about 120 acres. Having 3 farms allows us to isolate our different varieties of the same species in order to prevent cross-contamination. We maintain a state-of-the-art seed cleaning facility for production of early generation and foundation seed. The seed we produce is allocated to the seed industry for mass production and then resale. We currently produce seed of 11 native species of grasses and forbs, which you see listed there. And the foundation seed is made available to the University of Idaho Agricultural Experiment Station, Idaho Crop Improvement Association, Utah Crop Improvement Association, other PMCs, and cooperating agencies. In a typical year, we ship between 1,500 and 8,000 pounds of seed. So this flow chart here shows the general process we follow for our plant materials development. The actual first step, not shown there, involves lots of discussions and literature searches to select which species should be targeted for evaluation based on the specific resource concerns that have been brought up from the field offices and others. So next comes the actual seed collection from the native stands, and staff from the NRCS field offices are asked every year to make collections or to send in site locations so that I and other people in the staff can make the collections. We also ask for seed or site locations from Forest Service or BLM, the Seeds of Success program. We get a little bit of seed from that. Now, we believe that the NRCS releases should have undergone testing and evaluation in order to provide some assurance of performance to the end user. So once an assemblage is put together, we conduct comparative evaluations in common garden studies and or greenhouse studies, depending on the characteristics we're looking to evaluate. Typical traits we look at can include stand establishment, forage or biomass production, time to emergence, or root development. We also consider seed production attributes like how competitive the species is against weeds, ease of seed harvest and cleaning, and overall seed production. So for a species to be viable in the commercial seed market, it needs to have certain qualities that lend themselves to broad-scale production. For example, the plants need to be tall enough to harvest with conventional equipment, They should have determinate flowering where the seed matures equally through the plant so that it can be harvested once instead of repeatedly. The plant also needs to have somewhat predictable yields so private growers can be sure of an income. And the species that don't meet these needs, so the low growing or indeterminate flowering, etc., are considerably more difficult to produce, and they're unlikely to be adopted in large growing operations and might only find production in contract-based niche markets. So for example, species like the blue-eyed Mary above are really common in sage-grouse habitat and would be great species to have in a mix. Unfortunately, the size and limited seed production make them less desirable to seed producers. Similarly, the balsam root there below is a great species to use, but unfortunately it takes several years for a plant to go from being seeded all the way to flowering and reliable seed production. So that means a grower would have to wait several years after establishment with no income from the field at all. And we have to consider these aspects before advancing a release. This is a chart developed by Scott Jensen of the Rocky Mountain Research Station. It shows the general market demand for certain classes of species. So the base of the pyramid consists of those species which are easy to produce large quantities of seed. That group contains mostly introduced species, some more productive natives. And the red peak of the pyramid are those species which have issues that make seed production difficult and thus make the seed more expensive. There in the yellow middle ground is where the PMC and most other agencies are spending their efforts trying to develop plants that are applicable over large areas, relatively easy to produce, and are generally affordable for BLM, Forest Service, and NRCS seeding projects. After the plants have been evaluated at the PMC and we've identified accessions which show promise, we enter the accession into what we call our field planting program, where the NRCS field offices in Idaho and Utah plant small, non-replicated test plots. Field plantings are our way of completing the final evaluations of promising plant materials under real-life conditions. And from these test plantings, we can develop recommendations for where the accession is adapted and suitable for conservation plantings. And we also gain long-term data like plant longevity, competitive ability against weeds, and the plant's ability to spread. Now we use the information gained from the field testing to develop recommendations for each release. Thus, different releases of the same species may be recommended for different environments or for different resource concerns. For example, if you're considering a blue bunch wheatgrass for a planting, we might recommend, say, Discovery Snake River wheatgrass for the 8 to 10 inch precip zone, or Anatone blue bunch for 10 inches or more, or Goldar for areas receiving 12 inches or more with grazing in mind. The end result, if you took all this information and plotted it on a map, I think would be fairly similar to the seed zones being developed by the Forest Service and other researchers. We just go about developing our recommendations using performance data as opposed to gynecological data. So this table you see here comes from our Technical Note 24, Conservation Plant Species for the Intermountain West. And in it you can find species descriptions, seeding information, release recommendations for hundreds of species in our service area. Okay, so I thought I'd highlight just a few of the plant releases from Aberdeen here, but keep in mind we don't just recommend NRCS releases. Different species or different releases or local ecotypes might be more appropriate to meet whatever the conservation objective is. So always use what's most appropriate and has the best likelihood of success. Okay, so for many decades, a lot of you might know this, Apar blue flax was the standard flax release for conservation plantings. And Apar was originally collected in the Badlands of South Dakota and was used as a quasi-native forb here in the Intermountain West. But a few years back it was realized through some DNA analysis that Apar actually originated in Europe and the South Dakota stand wasn't native. So it was decided then that a new true native release of flax was needed. So Aberdeen and others released Maple Grove Lewis flax from a collection in Millard County, Utah in 2003. Unfortunately, its production attributes aren't as good as Apar. It doesn't flower as prolifically or produce as much seed. So because of that, the seed is quite a bit more expensive for now. But Maple Grove's become pretty widely used in the Intermountain West. Okay, a few years back, it was determined that there was a need for a blue bunch wheatgrass release that was better adapted to the lower end of the precip range of the species. And the standard release Goldar, it was recommended, like I said earlier, for areas receiving 12 or more inches of precipitation. So that actually left quite a bit of ground that there wasn't a suitable blue bunch for. The other choice for low precipitation areas was Seacar, which turned out to be a Snake River wheatgrass. So because of that, in 2004, Aberdeen got together with Rocky Mountain Research Station, BLM, Utah Division of Natural Resources, Utah State University, and released Anatone. The original collection site for Anatone was in southeast Washington, and while that would appear to be a region of higher precipitation, Anatone has been shown to have improved seedling vigor over the other releases and other ecotypes. And that translates to better establishment in low precipitation years. Anatone's been tested in Idaho, Utah, Nevada, and other states, and often has better establishment and persistence than even the local ecotypes. So now Anatone is widely used through the Great Basin due to its improved establishment and performance, and at this point it's possibly being overused. It makes up a huge percentage of the total seed BLM uses each year, and I think it would be good to diversify blue bunch seedings. So regional ecotypes of blue bunch are being evaluated and released by other agencies that might be more genetically similar to local populations. So in the end, for some species, like blue bunch, landowners might need to weigh their priorities between the likelihood of establishment versus genetic similarity before selecting a seed source. Okay, into some forbs here. Penstemons are one of the most diverse and common plant groups in our area, and there's a large need and demand for releases. Idaho has 2 Penstemon releases, Richfield Firecracker Penstemon on the left and Clearwater Venus Penstemon on the right. Richfield is recommended in sagebrush, juniper, and ponderosa pine zones between about 3,000 and 8,000 feet elevation in areas getting about 10 to 16 inches of precipitation. Clearwater, on the other hand, is more suited for mountain slopes from a couple thousand to 6,000 feet in elevation, getting 20 to 35 inches of precipitation. Even with these releases, more work needs to be done in getting some more penstemons out there. This is a great species and they're a great genus, and we need to get more releases to fill all the niches. Okay, Amethyst germplasm hoary tansy aster just got released in 2014 by the PMC for use in wildlife habitat and pollinator plantings in the Intermountain West. This is a really attractive species to native insects. It's an excellent species for sage-grouse habitat restoration, especially useful for post-wildfire seedings where a quick establishment of pollen and nectar sources is desired. The original source population of Amethyst is located near the St. Anthony Sand Dunes, Fremont County, Idaho. This is a short-lived perennial native forb, common in plant communities with 8 to 15 inches of annual precip. It's pretty common and degraded to disturbed sites and made its way into weeds of the West, so some people consider it a weed, but we don't. It's an excellent pollinator plant. Blooms from late July all the way into October and even later in some cases. We've seen it getting visited by a variety of bees, butterflies, and moths. The first seed allocation of tansy aster went out to the commercial market this year. So seed of Amethyst will be available for purchase in 2016 or 2017. Douglas Dusty Maiden is a native biennial or short-lived perennial. It's an excellent pollinator species, attracts bees in June through July. We evaluated several accessions of Dusty Maiden, and we're currently trying to work out some kinks in seed production before we make an official release. We hope to get this released in the next 2 to 3 years, but if we continue to have problems with seed production, we might decide to drop this for a while and look for something else that's easier. We examined about 40 collections of sulfur buckwheat and whorled buckwheat between 2007 and 2011. The goal was to find a forb that was useful in sage grouse and pollinator plantings in areas getting 14 to 20 or so inches of precip. We evaluated these for establishment, survival, plant size, floral display, and seed production. And we ended up selecting an accession of whorled buckwheat from Caribou County, Idaho for release. And we're currently bulking the seed so that we can have enough ready to meet anticipated needs prior to it getting put out on the market. So it should be available to growers in a year or two and available for purchase shortly after that. So what's next? We're always open to new ideas to work on, and these are just a few of the forb species we've encountered in our travels that might work under production or be useful to land managers. So in the next few years, we hope to conduct some good evaluations and get working towards release on some of them. But if you folks in the audience know of good populations, we'd be really interested in knowing where they are. And also, if you have any other suggestions for species, we'd be more than happy to take a look at them. So in addition to developing plant materials, there's also a need for the technology to establish the plants in adequate numbers and in a cost-effective way. The PMC has been fortunate over the last several years to have a few really innovative employees who've developed new methods, either to establish the plants in the field settings or to produce the seed easier and thus reduce the cost. The Waterjet Stinger was specially designed to use high-pressure water to hydro-drill a hole in the ground to plant unrooted hardwood cuttings into riparian sites. This isn't actually invented by the PMC, as some have heard, but we significantly modified it for our conditions and needs. These are actually pretty fun to operate, but more importantly, they do a really good job. They're very quick. You can plant a large number of cuttings in a short period of time. They allow cuttings to be planted directly into a wet environment, and the liquefied soil settles around the cuttings, eliminating air pockets in the root zone. Just in the last couple of years, some of our guys developed a harvesting machine here, developed to make multiple non-destructive harvests of forb and shrub seeds, and to address that issue of indeterminate maturation. The jet harvester here operates using a PTO-driven fan that creates suction to displace and collect seed from the plants without damaging the plants. So when operated correctly, the resulting harvested material contains only ripe seeds and relatively little inert matter. And the unripe seed is left on the plant for later harvest. So by getting the multiple harvests in, you can get improved yields, and then the cleaner harvested material means less time and effort in processing, so the end result is a cheaper product. We've used this on several forbs with really good results. Works great with just about anything in the composite family. Any of the light wing seeds really seems to work well. We also use it on shrubs like winter fat and four-winged saltbush. And for several years, we've been looking at the establishment of wetlands, rushes, and sedges. Seeds of these species have certain requirements that prevent them from establishing predictably in restoration plantings. they need to stay damp, they need exposure to sunlight in many cases, and a lot of them float. So meeting all those conditions at once is a real trick. And over the years, we looked at methods to decrease stratification periods to speed up and enhance the germination. We've also developed methods to direct seed as opposed to using greenhouse-produced materials. So right now, this project's kind of under development. We're collaborating with the ARS, Forest Service, and Utah State University in a study investigating techniques to establish localized populations of forbs and shrubs in small islands where they can spread out into established grasslands and other grass seedings. So one of the main barriers to the forb establishment is lack of moisture at the needed time for germination. So in our project, we're comparing different methods to extend the available moisture period. One method we're looking at involves using specially designed snow fences called the hollow frame fence system, which was created to make dense snow drifts. The result is an extended cool moist period during the spring for germination. And the second technique on the right is this ensilate fabric, which is a woven cloth that is commonly used to protect seedlings in gardens from frost. The fabric increases soil temperatures and decreases evaporation, resulting in an extended warm moist period. So these studies are being installed in southeast Idaho and in 2 sites in Utah this fall. So we should be seeing our first data next spring. We're looking at several different species, seeing which plants respond to which of the treatments, and then we'll be looking into a cost analysis. So in the end, wrapping this up, the goal of the plant materials program is to get a diversity of plant materials products available for a variety of conservation needs. Our plants are selected to address specific resource concerns and to have broad applicability, but might not be the best choice in situations where you're trying to restore natural conditions. Though we're certainly proud of our materials, we want managers to use whatever species or releases meet their objectives. So I would always suggest people be aware of the full suite of species available and know the benefits and limitations of each before putting together a seed mix, and to make selections based not just on the desired climax plant community, but based on what can do the job at a reasonable price. And that's it.
Great, thank you. All right, well, now we have time for questions. So if you have questions for Derek, please go to your control panel at the top right of your screen and open your questions pane, and you can type your questions in there. Do you have any questions, Charlie?
I was going to ask him if he has...
Oh, not yet? Okay, we're waiting for questions to come in. While we're waiting, I have a question about the ensilate fabric. So that would be So would that be something that you put on in the spring and take off before summer?
What we're looking at is putting it on in the fall, right after seeding.
Oh, okay.
So we've cleaned the site out, sprayed out all the weeds. We make this clean island, then seed into it, and then you can staple the fabric right over the top of it.
Great.
And then typically you would leave it on through a little bit of the spring as the plants germinate. You can't leave it on too long.
Mm-hmm.
The plants will start pushing up against it, and the reduced sunlight causes some etiolation. So you've got to return to the site and remove it after a little bit.
Great, thanks. Are you ready with your question?
I think so.
Do you want me to read it, or do you want to ask?
I'm going to ask him if it's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Charlie in my office here has a question for you.
Hi. Have you met with resistance from the rangeland stakeholders to the introduction of things like lupins and astragalus and things that are considered poisonous to cattle?
Yeah, we have actually, and that's one of the reasons we've really stayed away from developing plant materials of anything with toxicity issues. In the past, a few years ago, we were looking at some Senecio species and found that they contained alkaloids, and we were told from, our superiors to just stop immediately with those investigations. Any opportunity where someone's cow dies and they could blame the NRCS for recommending that seed, we just want to avoid that whole scenario.
Got it. Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because there's a lot of plants that really should be looked at, and especially like lupins that are already on the rangeland.
Right. And with it being a semi-arid ecosystem, they're a huge player in our seed banks. So, oh well.
Yeah, and what we've managed, we actually have been able to recommend a few of them for pollinator plantings in areas that are specifically set aside for pollinators and don't have any chance of getting crazed.
Excellent.
But otherwise, for larger restoration,
yeah,
we just have to avoid them.
Okay. Well, that answers that question. Thanks.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Great, thanks. Okay, we have a couple more questions coming in. Larry Loftus asks, how portable is the Waterjet technology for planting? Does this require a tractor or other vehicle to transport and power this?
Ours is put on a trailer that we can haul behind an ATV. Depending on the site, like if there's actually water there that you can use, it requires a hose to be put in the pond. And that's the most limiting factor, is where you can get the water from to operate it. We have plans available on our website for you to build your own. Lots of conservation districts have already invested in making their own, so you can find them. Otherwise, send me an email and I can send you the plans to have yours built.
Great, thanks. John Proctor asks, can you share or sell very small amounts of pollinator-friendly seed for demonstration plantings at U.S. Forest Service districts sooner than 2016 or 17?
For certain species we can, depending on how much seed we have. And most of the time, all we ask in return is to get a little bit of information back from you on how well it worked, if it established or not. Yeah, so send me an email requesting some seed or asking for what we have, and we'd certainly work with you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so regarding your email, I guess should I have, you can, it's probably on, if people need your email, you can probably Google it, I'm assuming, right? In fact, I think I have, and I think I saw it.
Yeah, I should have put it on the presentation there at the end, sorry. It's just derek.tilley@id.usda.gov.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, well, that looks like the last question. If people still have more questions, you can type them in while I'm giving my little ending spiel. Oh, John Proctor asks if you would repeat the email.
Derek, D-E-R-E-K, Tilley, T-I-L-L-E-Y, at ID, as in Idaho, .usda.gov.
Great, thank you so much.
Yep.
All right. Well, we would greatly appreciate it if you would take our 3-question survey of this webinar that will appear after the webinar has ended. A recording of this webinar will be sent to you automatically through the GoToWebinar system tomorrow, and I will also post it today after the webinar on our Great Basin Fire Science YouTube channel. Eventually I'll get them all up on our website, but that's a little bit more of a process. I'm getting a little bit behind on that, but they are all up on our YouTube channel currently. Our 12th webinar in this series, titled Using Field Studies to Find the Most Promising Seed Sources for Restoration, presented by Beth Ledger, will take place on Wednesday, April 29th. And also, not part of this webinar series, but we had the opportunity to put a webinar, a presentation that was already happening. We're doing a webinar for it. It's the Science of Sagebrush Restoration, and it emphasizes sagegrass by Dr. Kaz Demrose, and that will be next Tuesday at 9 in the morning. And I'll post those events on our webinar today. All right, if you have more questions regarding this webinar or have questions for future webinars, Derek gave his email address, so thank you so much, and then you're also welcome to email or call me at any time. Thank you all for your participation today, and thank you so much, Derek, for your presentation.
My pleasure.
All right, have a great day, everyone.